World history is important. You learn a lot about several historical events, political leaders, and activists. You're learning a lot about specific people and their influence on modern-day society. I want to focus on these people, the activists, the ones who throughout history put their minds forward to create change and influence the world we live in today. But these movements aren't made overnight, so that begs the question, how does activism begin? I decided to go around the school and ask a few people this question, along with my mom, who had never taken this class before, and if world history had influenced this idea for them. This was their response.
What sparks activism for me is probably when someone doesn't like what someone else is doing, and yeah, that's about it for me.
Problems spark activism. Activism always exists when there's a problem, and publicity makes activism grow even more. Publicity is all that tinder and kindling on top of the spark that is the problem.
I think activism begins first and foremost with a person or people who see an injustice in the world and they want to do something about it. Sometimes it's affected them personally, and a lot of times that's what can really spark the passion to make a change. Because when it affects us personally, it becomes something that we're very passionate about, and we want to get out and make a difference, which is really what activism is all about. So I think it starts with maybe an experience, personal experience, or experiencing other things going on in the world to where someone says, this isn't right, we need to do something about it, we need to make a positive change for the world.
It doesn't.
World history has inspired me to take a stand on many other issues, such as the Take a Stand project, which inspired us to take a stand.
You know, unfortunately, back in my day, going to high school in the 1980s, we learned straight up history. We learned about Martin Luther King. We learned about the women's movement to give women the right to vote. We learned about how, the early Americans, if you will, the colonists revolted and decided to separate from Great Britain. But we really didn't focus a lot on activism in that present day. And of course, as I got older and look back on the 1980s, there was a lot that we could have talked about going on in the United States. So unfortunately, my world history class didn't really talk that much about activism or help us become a generation that would grow up and do good things to help others and to recognize injustices in the world. It wasn't until I was an adult, probably later in college, that I realized that there were some things in the world that I would like to see changed. I never really became an activist, but I definitely, I voted. I voted for those in office who would make the positive changes in the world, because that's one of the most powerful things we can do as citizens of the United States of America.
So for what I've heard, activism is really helpful to some people, and world history helps put that in focus through some of our projects, some of our units. For some, activism's a choice, and they just choose no. World history has nothing to do with it. For some, they've never taken this class and have never properly learned about an activist, unless they did it on their own time. But personally, I believe activism's a choice. But not just any choice. It starts with an idea. This idea starts with one person and spreads to many others. The idea is impossible. But those brave enough to put themselves forward towards prejudice, towards shame, and even towards death can use their intelligence and strength to spark a revolution. And I think world history helped influence this idea for me. I may not be able to, or want to, go out and protest for what I believe, but this class gave me new respect for those who do. In your last unit, Human Rights, you learn of many activists who throughout history and throughout several wars have created change. People like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, and many more. And look, activism's not for everyone. But without it, we wouldn't be where we are. We'd still have slavery without people like Abraham Lincoln. We'd still have segregation without Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X. France would still be controlled by their church if it weren't for all the peasants revolting against their cruel government. There will always be something wrong, and there will always be someone brave enough to fight against it. And I think world history can help us look into the past to see our future. We can look into the minds of these activists, and using their minds, we can form our own ideas and create a resistance to injustice. So I'm not telling you to change the world, but I'm telling you to look at who has. And maybe that could spark something in you. And let activism begin.